Do what you wish. These four words opened the door to Fantasia, but they barely scratched the surface of the chaos that erupted behind the cameras. The Never-Ending Story wasn't just a beloved fantasy film. It was a production nightmare that nearly destroyed its young star, traumatized an entire generation, and created one of cinema's most enduring urban legends. Picture this: horses trained for 7 weeks to drown in black goo, a child actor's back shattered before filming even began, and an author so disgusted with the adaptation that he tried to sue his own creation out of existence. The German production that became 1984's most expensive non-American film was drowning in its own swamp of sadness long before Artax ever sank into that nightmare bog. I'm about to reveal 20 weird facts about the Never-Ending Story that will change how you see this childhood classic forever. Plus, stick around for the bonus fact. It involves a secret that the studio buried deeper than the nothing itself. Let's dive into Fantasia's darkest secrets. Noah Hathaway's back was broken before he even started filming. The curse of Atreyu began before cameras rolled. Noah Hathaway, the 13-year-old chosen to play the young warrior, was learning to ride horses in preparation for his role when disaster struck. One of the horses fell directly on top of him, shattering his back and leaving him in traction for an entire month. Doctors weren't sure if his spine would heal in time for production to begin. What audiences didn't know was that Hathaway was literally fighting for his life while learning his lines. The studio considered recasting him multiple times, but the determined teenager refused to give up the role he'd fought so hard to win. His broken back would plague him throughout filming, making every stunt sequence a test of endurance and pain tolerance that no child should have endured. The author tried to stop his own movie. Michael Ende, who wrote the original novel, became the film's biggest enemy. He was so disgusted with Wolfgang Petersen's adaptation that he demanded his name be removed from all promotional materials and filed multiple lawsuits trying to halt production. Ende felt the movie completely missed the philosophical depth of his book, reducing it to what he called a shallow adventure story. The author's rage wasn't just creative frustration, it was betrayal. He'd sold the film rights, believing the movie would honor his vision of childhood imagination versus adult cynicism. Instead, he watched his complex meditation on storytelling get transformed into what he saw as a mindless spectacle. Ende's public denouncement of the film created a bitter irony. The story about the power of belief was being destroyed by its own creator's lack of faith. It took 7 weeks to train a horse to die. The most traumatic scene in cinema history, Artax's drowning in the swamp of sadness, was a logistical nightmare that pushed animal training to its absolute limits. Horses have a natural survival instinct that prevents them from allowing themselves to be submerged, especially in thick, dark liquid that triggers their deepest fears. The production team spent 7 grueling weeks conditioning the horse to stand on a hidden, submerged platform while black swamp water rose around its body. They had to overcome millions of years of equine evolution that screamed "run" every time the horse saw the bog. The scene required multiple horses, elaborate pulley systems, and a level of animal psychology that bordered on the disturbing. What looks like 3 minutes of heartbreak on screen represented nearly 2 months of psychological conditioning. The entire German cast was dubbed in English. Because filming took place primarily in Munich's Bavaria studios, most of the supporting cast consisted of German actors who performed their entire roles in German. Their English dialogue was completely replaced in post-production by American voice actors, creating a bizarre disconnect between what audiences saw and heard. This wasn't a simple language barrier issue. It was a full-scale audio reconstruction. Actors like Sidney Bromley and Patricia Hayes had to re-record their performances months later, trying to match lip movements and emotional beats to scenes they'd performed in a completely different language. The dubbing process was so extensive that some actors didn't recognize their own performances in the final film, creating a surreal experience where the movie's most emotional moments were delivered by voices that had never been on set. The Nothing was originally much more terrifying. Wolfgang Petersen's original vision for The Nothing was far more disturbing than what made it to theaters. Early concept art and test footage showed The Nothing as a writhing mass of tentacles and teeth that actively consumed everything in its path, leaving behind graphic devastation that resembled a cosmic horror film more than a children's fantasy. The studio forced Petersen to dial back the nightmarish imagery after test screenings left children sobbing in theaters. What we see on screen, an advancing wall of darkness, was actually the sanitized version. The original Nothing featured rotting landscapes, melting creatures, and a sense of existential dread that would have traumatized audiences even more than the final version did. Petersen later admitted that his first cut of the film was unsuitable for human viewing. Falkor's voice actor never met the puppeteers. Alan Oppenheimer, who provided Falkor's warm, grandfatherly voice, recorded all his dialogue in complete isolation from the physical production. He never saw the elaborate puppetry work, never met the operators who brought Falkor to life, and had no idea how his words would be synchronized with the creature's movements. This created a strange artistic disconnect where the soul of Falkor, his voice, was completely separated from his body during creation. Oppenheimer had to imagine the dragon's personality based solely on script descriptions and Petersen's verbal direction. The magical chemistry between voice and puppet that audiences love was actually a happy accident of post-production editing, not intentional performance collaboration. The swamp scene caused mass therapy sessions. The Artax drowning sequence traumatized so many children that child psychologists reported a significant increase in therapy sessions specifically related to the NeverEnding Story. Kids across America were having nightmares about losing their pets, developing separation anxiety, and experiencing what therapists called Artax syndrome. Some theaters started posting warnings before the film, and several school districts banned field trips to see it after teachers reported classroom disruptions. Parents began leaving theaters during the swamp scene, creating a mass exodus that became so common that theater owners knew exactly when it was happening based on lobby traffic. The scene's impact was so severe that it spawned academic studies on childhood trauma in cinema. Tammy Stronach only made one movie ever. The Childlike Empress, played by Tammy Stronach, gave one of cinema's most memorable performances and then vanished from Hollywood forever. She was only 10 years old during filming and decided after experiencing the grueling production schedule that acting wasn't for her. Stronach's ethereal performance as the dying ruler of Fantasia was her first and last film role. She walked away from multiple sequel offers and a potentially lucrative career to pursue dance and theater. In interviews decades later, she revealed that the intense isolation required for her mysterious character, spending weeks alone on elaborate sets, left her feeling disconnected from the collaborative joy she'd expected from filmmaking. The Oren medallion was cursed. The production was plagued by so many accidents and mishaps involving the Oren medallion that crew members began referring to it as cursed. Multiple props were lost, stolen, or destroyed under mysterious circumstances, and anyone who handled it seemed to encounter bad luck. Beyond Hathaway's broken back, the curse claimed victims throughout production. Stunt doubles were injured, equipment malfunctioned, and even the catering truck caught fire on a day when the medallion was prominently featured in scenes. The superstition became so widespread that some crew members refused to touch the prop, requiring special handlers for scenes involving the Oren. The Rockbiter was almost completely different. The beloved Rockbiter character underwent a complete personality overhaul after his original design tested as too frightening for children. Early concepts showed him as a genuinely menacing creature whose dialogue was bitter and cynical rather than melancholy and wise. Before we continue with these mind-blowing revelations, Go ahead and like and subscribe because we're just getting started with the secrets that Hollywood buried in Fantasia's ruins. The Rockbiter's transformation from villain to victim represents one of the most significant character changes in film history. His original dialogue included graphic descriptions of destruction and nihilistic philosophy that would have made him a secondary antagonist. The decision to make him a tragic figure mourning his lost friends fundamentally changed the film's emotional landscape. Gmork's eyes were controlled by radio. The terrifying wolf creature Gmork required cutting-edge puppetry technology that pushed practical effects to their limits. His piercing eyes were controlled by radio-operated servos that allowed operators to direct his gaze from across the set, creating unnaturally focused stares that heightened his menace. The radio-controlled eye system was so advanced that it occasionally picked up interference from nearby radio stations, causing Gmork's eyes to move erratically during takes. Some of these accidental movements were so unsettling that Peterson kept them in the final film, adding an extra layer of otherworldly menace to an already terrifying creature. The Ivory Tower took 6 months to build. The massive Ivory Tower set piece was so elaborate that it required its own dedicated soundstage and took over 6 months to construct. The tower was built as a practical, full-scale structure that could be climbed and explored, making it one of the largest fantasy sets ever created for film. What makes this even more remarkable is that most of the tower's intricate details are never seen on camera. The production team crafted elaborate chambers, staircases, and decorative elements that exist only in wide shots or background glimpses. The obsessive attention to unseen detail was part of Peterson's philosophy that actors needed to feel the reality of Fantasia to deliver authentic performances. Bastian's attic was actually freezing. The schoolhouse attic where Bastian reads the book was one of the most uncomfortable sets ever constructed. Located in a genuine attic space in Vancouver, the set had no heating system, and temperatures regularly dropped below freezing during winter filming. Barrett Oliver, who played Bastian, had to deliver emotional dialogue while literally shivering from cold. His visible breath in several scenes wasn't a special effect, it was genuine condensation from the frigid air. The production team eventually brought in small heaters between takes, but Oliver spent most of his filming time wrapped in blankets and drinking hot chocolate to prevent hypothermia. The Southern Oracle nearly killed its operators. The massive Southern Oracle statues required teams of operators hidden inside their bases to control the intricate facial movements and laser beam effects. The confined spaces, combined with the heat generated by the laser systems, created dangerously high temperatures that nearly caused heat stroke among the puppeteers. Several operators had to be hospitalized for heat exhaustion during the filming of the Southern Oracle sequence. The enclosed spaces reached temperatures over 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and the laser effects created additional heat that made the environment nearly uninhabitable. OSHA regulations implemented after the NeverEnding Story directly reference these working conditions. Ang Ji-wook's laboratory was functional. The elaborate contraptions and scientific instruments in Ang Ji-wook's laboratory weren't just props. They were fully functional mechanical devices created by master craftsmen. Every telescope, gear system, and measuring device actually worked, even though their functions were never explained in the film. This obsessive attention to detail meant that actor Sidney Bromley could actually operate the equipment during filming, giving his performance an authenticity that's impossible to fake. The laboratory set became so famous among prop makers that it's still studied today as an example of functional set design. The Sphinx Gate required real meditation. The actors had to pass through the Sphinx Gate's deadly gaze, which in the film's mythology could destroy anyone who wasn't pure of heart. Peterson insisted that his actors actually practice meditation and mental preparation before filming these scenes, believing their genuine mental state would translate to screen. This pseudo-mystical directing approach created a strange atmosphere on set, where fantasy and reality blurred. actors reported feeling genuinely nervous about walking between the sphinxes, even though they knew the laser effects were harmless. The psychological preparation became so intense that some cast members continued meditating throughout production. The racing snail was the most expensive puppet. Despite having minimal screen time, the racing snail required the most sophisticated puppetry work in the entire film. Its shell alone cost more than most of the other creatures' entire construction budgets, featuring intricate mechanical systems that allowed for realistic slime secretion and shell rotation. The snail's brief appearance represents thousands of hours of engineering work for what amounts to less than 30 seconds of screen time. The puppet was so mechanically complex that it required its own dedicated operator team and backup systems. Most of the snail's sophisticated mechanisms are never visible on screen, making it perhaps the most over-engineered background character in film history. The Luck Dragon's flying rig traumatized Noah Hathaway. The elaborate flying sequences with Falkor required Hathaway to be suspended high above the ground on mechanical rigs that were primitive by today's safety standards. The young actor developed a fear of heights from the dangerous flying sequences that persists to this day. Multiple near accidents during the flying scenes left Hathaway with lasting anxiety about aerial work. The mechanical systems frequently malfunctioned, leaving him suspended in precarious positions for extended periods. His genuine terror in some flying scenes isn't acting, it's real fear captured on camera as he clung to a malfunctioning puppet system. The film's success destroyed the original props. The movie's unexpected popularity led to a feeding frenzy among collectors that resulted in most of the original props being stolen, destroyed, or lost. Studios weren't prepared for the merchandising potential and hadn't properly cataloged or secured the elaborate sets and creatures. Within 2 years of the film's release, nearly every significant prop had vanished from Bavaria Studios. The Aran medallions, Falkor puppet heads, and even sections of the ivory tower were sold, stolen, or simply disappeared. Today, original NeverEnding Story props are among the most valuable movie memorabilia in existence, with authentic pieces selling for six-figure sums. Wolfgang Petersen considered it his biggest mistake. Despite the film's massive success and cultural impact, director Wolfgang Petersen later called The NeverEnding Story the most painful experience of his career. The endless production problems, author conflicts, and child safety issues left him emotionally scarred and reluctant to work with young actors again. Petersen, who went on to direct blockbusters like Das Boot and In the Line of Fire, consistently ranked The NeverEnding Story as his most difficult film. He admitted in later interviews that the pressure of creating a family-friendly fantasy while managing such complex practical effects and child actors pushed him to his psychological breaking point. Bonus fact: hidden in Bavaria Studios' vaults is a 4-hour director's cut of The NeverEnding Story that includes an entirely different ending, additional creatures, and scenes that explain plot points left mysterious in the theatrical release. This cut has never been publicly screened and remains locked away due to legal disputes between the studio, Ende's estate, and Petersen himself. The extended cut reportedly includes graphic scenes of the Nothing's destruction, additional backstory for the Childlike Empress, and a completely different final confrontation that's more faithful to Ende's original novel. Studio executives who've seen it describe it as too intense for any audience and a completely different movie. The extended cut's existence is confirmed by multiple sources, but its contents remain one of cinema's greatest secrets. The NeverEnding Story gave us a gateway to imagination, but the real story was always happening behind the camera. A broken child star, a disgusted author, and a director pushed to his limits created something far more complex than the simple fantasy adventure audiences fell in love with. Sometimes the most magical stories come from the darkest places. What other childhood classics are hiding secrets this deep? Let me know in the comments, and remember, in Fantasia, as in Hollywood, nothing is ever what it seems. Do what you wish, but maybe read the fine print first.